In this video, we're going to be building a relatively inexpensive, small form factor gaming PC that's capable of playing new AAA games at 1440p, and even some of the stuff that came out in the last couple years can do up to 4K. And I say relatively inexpensive because by the end of this, we're going to get out cheaper than a new Nintendo Switch 2 with a few games, or even the Xbox Series X or PS5 with some games added on top. So if you've already got a large PC game library, this might make sense. In this video, we're going to go over everything as we build it. I'll also mention some alternative parts that you could use to bring the cost down just a bit. But before we get into it, I do want to mention that this video is sponsored by URCD Keys. I've been using this site for quite some time now. They offer Steam keys, Uplay, Ubisoft, but the main thing I pick up over here are Windows 11 Pro keys. And right now, if you use code ETA, you can get 25% off. So at checkout, we'll just enter the code ETA. That's going to bring the price down to $22.88. They're going to email you that key, and then you can activate Windows. Speaking of that, let's head over to a new PC that I recently built. As you can see, we're running Windows 11, and from Settings, we're going to go to Activation Settings. It's going to tell us that we're not active. We don't have a key installed, so we're just going to paste it right in here, choose Next. It's going to activate Windows for us, and we're ready to go. If you're in need of cheap Windows keys, I'll leave a link in the description. And remember, you can use code ETA for 25% off. Getting right into it here, starting out with the motherboard. And what I've got here is an Asus Prime Micro ATX. I was originally going to go Mini ITX. I bought this one on eBay, but unfortunately it didn't come with the backplate, and it's my fault. I didn't read the description. I already had this, and in most cases, you can get a Micro ATX cheaper than Mini ITX, especially on the secondhand market. And luckily, the case we're going to be using here does support this form factor. It's a B550 chipset, so AM4 isn't dead, especially for these lower cost builds. And for the CPU, or APU rather, I opted to use the 5700G. Might sound a bit odd, but these are around $106 over on eBay right now. And usually we'd go with something like a 5600 or a 5600X, and that's because the price on these has been a little more than those. With this, we get 8 cores and 16 threads as opposed to the 5600 6 cores and 12 threads. And in most cases, this does outpace the 5600X. Aftermarket AM4 coolers are pretty cheap, but I'm actually going to be using the Wraith Spire. This is the LED version, so we've got a red LED around it and the AMD logo lights up. It's got a copper slug, and it's much larger than the Wraith cooler. But since that 5700G was secondhand, they didn't send a cooler over with it, so I'm going to be using this. But again, over on Amazon, you can pick up a really cheap aftermarket cooler. When it comes to RAM, we need DDR4, and I've been using this RAM for quite some time. It's Team Force Vulcan Z. It's around 26 bucks over on Amazon for 16 gigs, but I picked up 2 packs, so we're going to bring this up to 32. Recently, they had a sale and it was sitting at around $23. It's kind of hard to beat 32 gigs of RAM for around 46 bucks. Even though it's DDR4 running it up to 3200, we're going to have more than enough with this system. And it does kind of match up with this motherboard. It actually looks pretty good. Storage is going to come down to personal preference, but with games being so large, I would suggest at least a 1 terabyte drive. I've got a 2 terabyte drive here, and you could always go with a smaller M.2 and then run SATA drives for your games. You could probably get out cheaper with a lot more storage that way. Okay, so we've got the motherboard put together. I also added a small aluminum heatsink for that M.2 drive. They're really cheap. Links are in the description. When it comes to the case, I love my small form factor cheap cases that you can get on Amazon, and every other week there's a new case on the market. This is very similar to one that we took a look at in the past, but that version only came in black, and this does come with a handle, so it's a pretty small form factor case. I mean, it's not a tiny case, but with something like this, we can fit a much larger GPU, and of course, we've got a micro ATX board that's going to fit right down in here. Mini ITX or Micro ATX, and again, a much larger GPU. And when it comes to like a small form factor GPU, people are charging crazy amounts for them when you consider what kind of performance they put out. So I would suggest something like this because you will have more GPU options. When it comes to powering this rig, I would suggest a modular SFX. So it's going to be much cleaner, but going SFX and modular can get a bit expensive. So to save some money, you can go with a non-modular ATX power supply. This case supports both SFX or ATX. Non-modular means we will need some zip ties to clean everything up, but the one that I opted to use is the Thermaltake Smart BX1 550 watt. So I've got the motherboard installed. We mounted up the power supply. Last thing we need to talk about here are GPUs. Now, there's a lot of options out there, especially for a case like this. If you want to go all AMD and get out real cheap, I would suggest something like the RX 6600 non-XT. You can get them on eBay for around 160. If you want to go NVIDIA, an RTX 4060 used on eBay would also be a great option for something like this. But I wanted to go all AMD because I do want to run SteamOS on this after we check out Windows performance. And one card that's been popping up on my radar recently, at least my used radar, was the RX 7600 XT. So this thing does have 16 gigs of VRAM, and prices on these things do fluctuate, so for the most part, they're not much cheaper than a brand new Radeon RX 9060 XT with 16 gigs of VRAM. Anywhere 350 up to 380, and this is going to be a bulk of the cost for this build here. If you're going to go with that lower end RX 6600, then you're going to save around 200 bucks here. But I'm going to be going with that RX 9060 XT because I do know that this thing is a great performer, and we might lose a little pairing it up with the older 5700G, but we're still going to have a really awesome 1440p machine here. I did have to reroute the power supply cables because the card that I'm using here is a bit longer. In fact, it's the Asus TUF Gaming RX 9060 XT Overclock Edition with 16 gigs of VRAM. But overall, I think the build turned out really nicely. Let's go ahead and boot this thing up for the first time. And one thing I actually didn't notice was we do have USB Type-C up front on this cheaper case. As you can see, a little bit of RGB on the card. And with that Wraith Spire, we get that lit up AMD logo and the red LED all the way around. I'm going to be running Windows 11 Pro on this machine. I do need to get some drivers installed, and then we'll jump right over there. So far, so good. Everything's been working really well here. As you can see, we've got that AMD Ryzen 5700G, 8 cores, 16 threads. We took it up to 32 gigs of RAM here, running at 3200 megahertz. And of course, the main claim to fame here, the thing that's really going to get some gaming going on this, is that AMD Radeon RX 9060 XT. And there's one thing I always like to do with these cards. It's just really basic here. You could use Afterburner to get this done, but I'm going to be using GPU Tweak 3. And with this, I'm not going to take the core clock up or the memory clock. We're basically just going to up that power limit by 10%. And in turn, this thing will reach those maximum clocks. So this does have a boost clock of 3,340, at least with the overclock edition that we have here. And just taking that power limit up will allow us to get there pretty easily. Okay, so I was pretty excited to show you some gameplay on this thing, and we will move over to my game capture after this one. But what we've got is Spider-Man 2, 1440p, very high, and FSR is set to quality. If you don't want to use any kind of scaling, you could drop this down to high 1440 with no FSR and see around the same kind of performance that we're seeing here. But this game still gives us some issues, and it's been a little while now. They put out some updates that broke a few things, and we still get a couple dips here and there. But for the most part, using the settings that we have here, we're seeing an average of around 83 FPS. The next thing I wanted to do is give you a look at a few benchmarks that I ran on this thing, and then we'll jump right back into some gaming. Geekbench 6, single core 1863, multi 8698. So this isn't going to win any CPU awards. Again, we've got that 5000 series. In fact, it is a lower end version because it's the 5700G. It's not the X or the X3D. But still, not bad for what we have here. Checking out some GPU benchmarks with 3D Mark, we've got Steel Nomad, 3,868. FPS with this one was 38.69, nice. And finally, Time Spy coming in with a 15,088. Getting back into some more gameplay, we've got Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p using the Ultra preset, which does enable FSR here. And with FSR off, again, just like we saw with Spider-Man, we need to kind of drop this down to high if you don't want to use that scaling and see the same kind of frame rate. But I don't mind using it. It still looks great just like it is, especially at this higher resolution. And we're seeing an average of around 82 FPS with this setup. Now, using this card with a much more powerful CPU, it's up in the 90s on average with these same settings. So it doesn't seem like we're holding this thing back so bad with that 5700G. The next one I wanted to test was Marvel Rivals, 1440p Ultra with FSR set to quality. I was hoping to get a little more out of it. I mean, it's still really playable, around 85 FPS on average during battle, and you could definitely get by playing this all day like it is. But it would be nice to be up to 120 with this setup, and with all of the games we're taking a look at, we're not going to be using frame generation. Keep in mind, I mean, we can enable it with most new games and almost double our frame rate. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that with some games, you'll be able to do 4K on the 9060 XT, and Forza Horizon 5 is one of those games. I do want to show you here because we are at a true 4K resolution. I'm not using XeSS, FSR, or Fidelity CAS. Move down, you can see no scaling, and we're using the Extreme preset. So we're maxed out here with Forza Horizon 5 at 4K on this setup, getting around 90 FPS on average, and I completely understand this is a very well optimized game. I mean, it runs on a lot of different systems, but to be able to take this up all the way at 4K, pretty awesome. And finally, Doom: The Dark Ages. Afterburner, top left-hand corner. We've also got the in-game metrics up in the right-hand corner. You can see we're at 1440 on this system. FSR set to quality, over 90 FPS on average. And I wasn't sure how this game was going to perform with the CPU paired up with that 9060 XT. It's been a bit hit or miss on a lot of different systems, but overall, this is a great experience. Given what we have here, not a bad little system, and I do think it's a pretty sleek looking little case too. The case itself is only around 40 bucks, which isn't too bad. I mean, there's not a lot to it, but we do get that tempered glass on the side. And if you wanted to get out cheaper, again, you could go with less RAM, less storage, and a lower end GPU. Still see some great 1080p performance with the RX 6600. But it's possible to build something like this with a combination of used parts and new parts. And if this was the only gaming PC that I had, I'd be perfectly happy with it. If you're interested in putting something like this together, I will leave links in the description. And again, I went all AMD because we're going to be installing SteamOS on this. Keep an eye out on the channel. Got a feeling we're going to see some amazing performance over there. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If there's anything else you want to see running on this, just let me know in the comments below. Like always, thanks for watching.